Hi, my name's Peter Knight. I'm an author, researcher, and interested in all things megalithic.
And you're also involved in the Stone Seeker tours. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
I am indeed, yes. I instigated Stone Seeker tours a number of years ago, and Stone Seeker isn't just tours, taking people for interactive trips around sites. They're also, it's my publishing house through which I publish my books through. But I wanted Stone Seeker tours to be something different, so we don't just roll up at sacred sites and say this is the archaeology and this is this, that and the other, and this is how they erected the stones, because that can often be a little bit flat. My tours have always been about interacting with a site, either observing sunrises or sunsets, or putting a dowsing rod in people's hands and see them get their first twitch and their eyes light up, or shamanic drumming as well, which we do a lot of as well. So it's very much interaction with the landscape I'm interested in.
It's a living occupation, should we say, rather than a crusty observational one.
Oh, certainly. It's my calling, really. It's my dream. I'm so glad to kind of almost earn a living doing something I love. I mean, how blessed am I? It's just wonderful taking people out to a sacred landscape and trying to connect them with perhaps something we've lost.
Now, your dulcet tones are more from the Midlands than from the Avebury locale, just a tad. How did you end up down here?
Oh, blimey, yes. Well, it just shows how something positive can come from something negative, because I was very much, until I was 30, I was very much a normal Joe Bloggs, working 9 to 5 in Birmingham, and then I was made redundant, and this was like in the 80s, shock horror, and there was a lot of unemployment at that time, Thatcher's Britain and everything like that. So I'd always been interested in Dorset. I'd been on holiday to Dorset, so I thought, right, I've got time on my hands, I've got my redundancy money, let's go down to Dorset. And I'd always been interested in archaeology as a kid, and I started going around the Dorset sites just for something to do when I wasn't job hunting. And then almost at the same time a kind of spiritual genesis happened. So then I was going around these sacred sites but looking at them with new eyes, and it all came from that, a thing that people would see being, a negative thing, being made redundant. And if you like, the universe used that tool to totally change my life into a direction that I'd never even imagined before.
Wow. What a lovely story. And of course, as they say, the rest is history. So
Well, the rest is prehistory.
Prehistory. Excellent. Let's talk a little bit about your new book. What's it called and what's it about?
It is West Kennet Long Barrow, Landscape, Shamans and the Cosmos. And it's about West Kennet Long Barrow, of course. I've been going to Avebury, taking people there for tours for many years, and I'd also been going in there and doing some shamanic drumming, and I realised that no one had done a guidebook about West Kennet. I didn't intentionally set out to do that, but I wanted to find out information about West Kennet, and I realised there was hardly anything out there. We'd got like 3 books about Silbury Hill, Michael Dames's excellent books. We've had lots of books about Stonehenge, some people would say too many, and but no one had done anything about West Kennet. So I thought, right, let's get all the facts together, and I thought it might be a 50-page booklet originally, and 233 pages later, and again it set me down a whole era, a whole passage I wasn't suspecting, because I was just going to bring together all that had been known. But of course we started discovering new things, and we were being shown new things to show us that the site is still very much active today, and we had lots of astronomical discoveries. And it kind of grew, it took on a life of its own, really, as I'm told books often do.
I've heard similar said, indeed. I was very captured by your presentation, and also when you talk about West Kennet, your excitement about the subject, which I think is infectious. But also, it's not necessarily, it's not a happy-go-lucky place. There is a sombre aspect to it, but that nevertheless should be embraced too. Would you say?
Oh, exactly. Yes. I mean, I said during the talk originally, of course, it was normal people like you and I wouldn't perhaps even want to go inside West Kennet. The dark, pitch-black chambers originally, before they put the skylights in, would have been the realm of the ancestors, the realm of the shaman. And of course, there is this darker, not in a negative sense, but this deeper aspect of initiation and rites of passage, where people would have gone in there to sort themselves out, really, and also to test their mettle, and to perhaps show the ancestors that they were genuine in their pursuit, perhaps. So West Kennet isn't to be taken lightly. Although I take lots of tour groups in there on bright sunny days, we also take deeper Reiki and shamanic groups in there, and it can be very powerful in there. People you know, feel emotions coming up. They release all sorts of stuff. You know, they can reduce to tears in there. I've had, you know, spontaneous healing happen on many occasions in there when we've taken people in for our shamanic evenings. So yes, there's very much the deeper aspect to West Kennet Long Barrow, but I would suggest that has always been there.
No, I would agree entirely.
Yeah.
You managed to touch very briefly there on the skylights without growling, I noticed.
Yes. Don't get me started on those.
Well, I intend to do just that.
Okay.
So let's just talk about that for a moment. Obviously, English heritage, if it's not an oxymoron in itself, have busied themselves changing what was and has been for a great many years an edifice of our ancestors into something akin to a visitor centre.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's not entirely their fault that some of the stones are missing. A couple of the capstones were missing. Piggott found them missing when he rolled up in 1955 to do the excavations. But rather than replace them with sympathetic stone, like another similar-looking sarsen, which they never do because they're frightened that it'll be taken for some of the original sarsen. So I can understand that argument to a certain extent. Yeah. But instead of just covering them up, you know, in a more sympathetic way, like textured stone, or kind of make it look a little bit stony, even though you can tell it's concrete, they decided, for health and safety, and so that tourists can come in, to put 3 skylights in, and 2 of them are still open to the you know, to the open skies, and they also imported many tons of concrete and plaster to make a place safe. But when you're considering that none of it had collapsed in 5,000 years, why do we need to put concrete and plaster in to make it safe? The only ruinous parts of West Kennet Long Barrow were because farmers and other people took chunks of it away, like at Avebury, you know, in the you know, over many years. So other than that, West Kennet can stand on its own. So, but yes, it's this health and safety mentality, and but no, I would rather fill this. I'd fill the skylights in tomorrow, and then people would go into a dark chamber,
which
like
into
Newgrange. When you do the Newgrange tour, for a few moments he turns the lights off, and then you really get a feel of how dark it is. You go into Stony Littleton, and right at the back of the chamber it's pitch black. So the only way you can get this effect today is why I do my shamanic drummings of an evening, because then the place does gradually go darker and darker and darker, and then you really get the full atmosphere and psychic effect, I think, of what was meant to be produced originally.
I think that's exactly right. Do you think that then that there is a way that we can help to educate those who would save us from ourselves to look after our monuments a little better?
How we can educate English heritage, do you mean? Well, it's a balancing act, isn't it? I mean, English heritage do have a responsibility to look after the site, whatever that includes. But yes, it's I have this thing about, you know, being responsibly using such sites. I mean, I go up there on a weekly basis, and I scrape wax off the stones, remove skylights and all sorts of ritual rubbish from inside. And so I can see how English heritage can get their backs up sometimes. I mean, you know, if the archaeology at the site was being so much damaged, and they wanted to fill it in, I actually would be there, the first in line, with a shovel in my hand, you know, because the site is more precious than, you know, than risk it being damaged by idiots. You know,
sure.
Some of the Cotswold stone, some of the dry stone walling has been taken away in the last few weeks. You know, people want to take a little bit away for them. You know, and it's ironic that most of the damage done to West Kennet Long Barrow, either through things being left in there or stones taken away, is done by my fellow pagans, which is really ironic. I very rarely see a cigar end butt up there, or a you know, a can, a Coke can, or any normal rubbish. It's always what we call ritual rubbish, and I think that's really sad. So I'm trying to educate them. In my book there's a whole chapter about how to use the site responsibly. And I'm not a killjoy, because I take whole groups in there myself, but at the end of our nights there, we can be up there 2 or 3 hours, and at the end of that time we all go out and clear up after us, and anybody following us in would not know that anybody had been in there, because I think the ancestors and the spirits don't want our rubbish, they want our love. And you know, that doesn't include, so if you want to leave anything on the site, like flowers and things like that, which is fine, why not leave them on the top, you know, rather than inside? Because it's what's in your heart that matters, it's your intent that matters, not necessarily what we leave there.
No, I would agree entirely. You talked a little bit about being a pagan and being, I would assume then, an adherent of the old ways, and a sense of interconnectedness with this Albion Isle. and with the seasons. Was it always that way? Were you raised a pagan?
Oh, definitely not. No, my dad is a cynic, or was a cynic as regards all this sort of stuff, and my mum was a God-fearing Christian, still is, you know. But no, I led a very normal life, so you know, all this was meant to be now, of course, and it's really ironic how it's really strange how your whole life can change, you know, just in a few months.
And would you say that
was
the catalyst the same event you were talking about before, after your redundancy, or had you already been pursuing the path anyway?
Not at all. No, I wasn't into spirituality. I was into archaeology, and I was always into history. I was a real bit of a nerd, actually. I was always better than anybody else at school at history, geography, and I liked archaeology, and I always liked biology. And when you think about it, those are 4 subjects dealing with the natural world.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And astronomy. I was into astronomy when I was a kid, and all of this was sort of kind of setting me up and a rehearsal to what I was going to do later on a spiritual level. So I already had that background knowledge of geography, geology, astronomy, and isn't that fascinating?
And now you're drawing on it all.
Yeah, it's amazing how things are turning in the background to get you to a certain place and you haven't got a clue any of it's going on. Isn't that wonderful?
So where would you say is your favourite place? If somebody said to you, okay, you get to pick one place to go for summer solstice, where do you go?
It's West Kennet Long Barrow, I'm afraid. I don't get involved in the scrum at Stonehenge. At the end of my talk, of course, I said the most sacred place, the most special place, you know, I regard is, of course, planet Earth itself. So, you know, this is the sacred place for me. But yes, I love going to Brittany and, of course, Newgrange. There's so many sacred sites across the world, and not enough time to go and see them. But I'm working on it. But I always seem to come home to West Kennet because in the Avebury area, I live just a few miles away now, and another thing that other things inspired me to do the book, because it's the only place I've ever been to in the world where I feel I've been before in a past life. None of the other sites I've ever had the remotest feeling of that, even though I've connected with them and things like that. And also, a few years ago, I also scattered the ashes of my father on the mound. So it really is a site of my ancestor, literally. So I think that gave me a closer psychic and emotional bond with the site. It also made me realise how the ancestors must have felt thousands of years ago when they left their relatives inside, because then the place really does become sacred to you in a way that you can't imagine before that.
No, I'd agree entirely. I suppose my regular attendance to Avebury in particular began around 2000 2001. And I was fortunate to be among those that attended the Samhain ceremony. And on that time we walked the avenue, we went up to Sanctuary, we did ceremony there, and I think there were 8 of us in the howling wind and the rain, and it was, I could barely move my fingers, it was so cold, but of course, as it should be. The last time I was there for Samhain was probably 3 years ago, and there were in excess of 300 people there in a huge circle. Have you noticed the quickening, as I like to call it?
Definitely, yes. I mean, more the summer solstice is particularly noticeable, of course. I mean, Stonehenge always goes a bit crazy around the summer solstice, but then during the afternoon, everybody ends up at Avebury. There are a lot more numbers now, and certainly it's almost this is the trouble with. A lot of sacred sites around the world, they're almost a victim of their own magnificence, because then as word gets around and spreads, more and more people want to come and see them. And this is why it's particularly important to honour the sites and not leave our rubbish behind. I mean, Avebury, as opposed to Stonehenge, can accommodate an awful lot of people and still have room to spare. And, the avenue can. So it's a very big landscape. It's a very voluptuous landscape. It can actually hold a lot of people. But yes, I have noticed a definite increase in numbers, and that's a great thing in a way, because this is what we're trying to do. So we can't moan about hundreds of people coming to Avebury at the festivals, because that's what we're trying to get people to connect with sacred sites again. But certainly there are certainly, if you avoid the festivals, and even if you go to Avebury or West Kennet just a few days later during the week, then you can have the place to yourself. So So, as with a lot of things, everybody piles into an area for one particular festival, and then a few days either side, you can very often have the site to yourself. But I never moan about increased numbers, to the sites in North Wiltshire, because let's face it, that's we want to get people into connecting with the landscape again and regard it as being sacred. And the only way to do that, in my book, is to walk the landscape.
Absolutely. And for me, I tend to notice that for the most part, it seems to be the youth seem to be joining us more.
Isn't that encouraging?
Yeah, absolutely.
Isn't that encouraging?
You look around a church congregation, and it seems to me those, not exactly heaven's waiting room, but perhaps not far from it. And you're thinking, well, perhaps they're hedging their bets just in case. Whereas with the old ways, it does seem to be more of the youth who, as you say,
it could be that the next generation's coming along, of course. Because I dare say you can find, on the Alpha course, lots of young teenagers as well. It often depends what your parents are doing. A good God-fearing Christian family might very well spurn the same thing in their children. But of course, we've had since the 60s. Of course, we've had very free-thinking parents around who are now, their children are now in their, late teens, 20s, 30s even, and they're having their own kids now. So I think it's blossoming from the 60s and onwards. So it has to get better. It has to get better.
No, I would agree completely. And as you say, it's hugely encouraging. I mean, the other thing that I noticed particularly about Avebury, of course, is that it's not just a ceremonial place. It always seems to me to be a place of healing. And because of that, it does seem to draw the wounded, shall we say.
Yes.
And some of whom don't ever seem to be able to leave too, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Not everybody, but I do think a lot of people stay beyond that which is good for them.
Yeah, it is. Well, you could say that about Glastonbury, of course.
Indeed,
It's a similar thing. There's a lot of wounded healers in Glastonbury, shall I say? But yeah, of course, these places that they will attract that, and perhaps that's one of the purposes of them. Although West Kennet was used for burials, for example, and for births even, it also was a healing place. That's one of the aspects of shamanism, isn't it? Today, it's one of the aspects is bringing healing through to the sick. So I guess even on a subconscious level, even though people may not know why they're coming to Glastonbury or Avebury, of course it just feels something's drawing them, and it's like a little sanctuary in this very harsh, this very fast negative world I guess we live in. And you roll up at Avebury, and then there's this huge chilling out place with these ancient stones, and the mysteries call out to you. And science is trying to explain everything, and everything's technological nowadays. And I think that's one of the things that's wrong with our society. We don't have mysteries anymore. And of course, when you start going out to these places and walking in ancient sites, spending a night in West Kennet, walking around crop circles, you've then got lots of questions which need answering, and that often impacts on your own life in a positive way, I would suggest. Yeah.
Peter Knight, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.